I'm going to talk today a little bit about Yerushalayim and the real meaning, or the source and the nature of Kedusha Yerushalayim. One of the best places to start, if we want to understand, is actually a Mishnah in the very beginning of Kelim. Masech Kelim begins with a whole list of different dargot, of different things. And one of the things it discusses is the different levels of Kedusha. It begins, there's already Mishnah Vav, Eser Kedushot Hein. There are 10 different levels of Kedusha in the world. And it goes through them. Eretz Yisrael Mekudeshet Mikol Haaretzot. Eretz Yisrael is more Kadosh than anywhere else. And Mai Kedushatan, what's so special about Eretz Yisrael? How is its Kedusha expressed? Shemivin Mimenu Ha'omer Habikurim V'Shtei Alechem. Ma she'ein Kaye B'Chol Haaretzot. And then it goes on to the next darga, which is Arot Mekufat Choma, walled cities. Then Lifnim Min HaChoma, we get inside the city of Yerushalayim. Harabayit Mukudash Mimenu. Harabayit is even more kadosh, and brings the various different nafkamina. Shein Azavin Zavot Nidot Ve'Yodot Nichnasim L'Sham. Then it gets on to Ezrat Nashim Mukudashat Mimenu, and bit by bit Ezrat HaKohanim Mukudash Mimenu, and then Ben Olam LeMizbeach. Eventually we get to the Kodesh Kodashim. The whole list here, basically almost concentric circles, decreasing levels of Kedusha, starting with the center of the Kodesh Kodashim, and moving outwards to different parts of Yerushalayim and into the whole of Eretz Yisrael. The Gra here has a comment. He deletes one word from the Mishnah. In the description of what's special about Eretz Yisrael, the Mishnah says, Mevin mimenu ha'omer, habikurim, ushtei alechem. The Gra says we should take the word bikurim out of the Mishnah. Why? Because the Gra asks a very simple question. Why doesn't the Mishnah mention that Eretz Yisrael is special because of the mitzvot hatulot ba'aretz? The fact you have to take trumot or ma'asrot, and all the various other different special mitzvot, shmita, various different mitzvahs which are tulot Eretz Yisrael. If Eretz Yisrael is kadosh, and that's an expression of Eretz Yisrael's kedusha, why doesn't the Mishnah mention that point? Says the Gra, because we're not dealing here with the kedusha of the soil of Eretz Yisrael, the kedusha ta'adama. We're dealing with a different type of kedusha. This Mishnah is discussing the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael from the point of view of the Shechina, the kedusha ta'shechina, and in that sense, we understand exactly what the Mishnah is talking about. The most concentrated place of the Shechina in Eretz Yisrael is the Kodesh Kodashim. And then you move outwards, different parts of the Beis HaMikdash, to get to the city of Yerushalayim and the whole of Eretz Yisrael. The whole of Eretz Yisrael is a makom of Shechina. Yerushalayim is even more intensely the place of the Shechina as you get into actually the Kodesh Kodashim, where the Shechina rests in the most intense form. So says the Gra, the fact that we have mitzvot taliyos ba'aretz, that's a expression of the kedusha of the soil itself, of the land being kadosh. But it's not an expression of Eretz Yisrael being a thing which surrounds Yerushalayim. And therefore, the mitzvah doesn't mention mitzvot taliyot ba'aretz. So the Gra, Bikurim is another example of mitzvot taliyot ba'aretz, and therefore it's not mentioned. Interestingly enough, in the Rambam's Perish Mishnayot, where obviously we have the Girs of the Mishnah of the Rambam himself, Bikurim is mentioned. But it's not that the Rambam disagrees with this point. It's a machloket about Bikurim, whether Bikurim is a mitzvah taliyot ba'aretz and connected similar to Trumot or Masrot, or is actually simply an expression of the Shechina and the unique hashkacha that the Kodesh Baruch Hu expresses over Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim. Okay. This idea that Yerushalayim's Kedusha evolves from it being the place of the Shechina is very, very sharply expressed by the Rambam. The Rambam holds that the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael was not permanent. It became Kadosh when we came to Eretz Yisrael in the time of Yehoshua. It's called Kedusha Rishona. But that Kedusha was temporary. Once we went into Galut, the Kedusha was lost. Then we came back in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, and once again the land became Kadosh. We Mekadesh the land. And there's even a machloket about that Kedusha, whether that Kedusha is permanent or temporary. The Rambam passes it's permanent. But the Rambam says when it comes to Yerushalayim, there's no question at all. As soon as the Mikdash was built in Yerushalayim, as soon as Yerushalayim was made Kadosh, the Kedusha was absolutely permanent and remains forever. And why? Says the Rambam in the most beautiful expression. The Rambam says, he asks, Lama ani omer b'mikdash Yerushalayim? Why do I say by the base of Mikdash Yerushalayim, Kedusha Rishona, Kedusha Na'atid Lavo? Whereas Kedusha Shara Eretz Yisrael in Shvi'et U'Masrot Kiyotz Behen Lo Kitchelit Lavo. Why? Why by the rest of Eretz Yisrael is Kedusha temporary? and the Kedusha of Yerushalayim permanent. Lefisha Kedusha Mikdash, Yerushalayim, Mipnei Shchina, V'Shchina Eina Betela. Because the Kedusha of Yerushalayim evolves from the Shchina, Shchina Eina Betela. Such a beautiful phrase that once the Shchina rests in the place, it never leaves that place, and therefore Kedusha of Yerushalayim is a permanent fixture. Now, to fully appreciate this, you have to add another point. First of all, well, two more points. First of all, point out that the Machloket Achronim, well, it's really a Machloket Achronim, the Minchat Chinuch has a suffix. Minchat Chinuch asks, surely if Yerushalayim is Kadosh, and its Kedusha is permanent, whereas the rest of Eretz Yisrael, maybe the Kedusha isn't permanent, maybe it's only Kadosh Midrabanan. So would a person have to separate Trumot or Masrot from Yerushalayim, even at periods of time when the rest of Eretz Yisrael didn't have Kedusha? So the Minchat Chinuch has a suffix, but the Chazon Ish says the whole question doesn't begin. Why? Because again, the mitzvah to tell it ba'aretz, the Kedusha revolves from the fact that there's Kedusha in the soil. We makadesh the soil to be special. Whereas the Kedusha Yerushalayim is a totally different type of Kedusha. It's a Kedusha, this is the Makom HaShchina. There's unique hashgacha. And therefore, there's not even a havamina to suggest that you have to take Trumot or Masrot from things that grow in Yerushalayim. Because that's not the type of Kedusha which is Mechayev Trumot or Masrot, as the Gra pointed out in the Mishnah in Kaye. Now, the Mishnah at the very, very end of Zvachim describes the various different travels of the Mishkan and the nafka minas to the where a Mishkan was and what one was allowed to do in the time of the Mishkan. And Lechora, the Kedusha of the Mishkan, is exactly the Kedusha we're talking about, the Kedusha of the Shechina. And the Mishnah describes the nafka mina about having the Mishkan in a fixed place. It says there are two basic nafka minas. One is whether it's muta or asa to build a bama, a private mizbeach. A bama is any single person can bring a private mizbeach in their back garden and bring a korban on it. When the Mishkan was in a settled place, it was forbidden to have a bama. And when the Mishkan was on its travels or in a temporary place, then it was permitted. That's the first nafka mina. The second nafka mina is, where is it mutter to eat kodshim kalim and maaseh sheni? When the Mishkan was in a permanent or semi-permanent place, so maaseh sheni and kodshim kalim had to be eaten within the vicinity of the Mishkan. But when it was in a temporary place, then it could be eaten anywhere you liked in Eretz Yisrael. So the Mishnah, the very end of Zvachim, goes through the various different stations. It says, Mishu Kama Mishkan, when the Mishkan was first developed, Nesru Abamot, the Bamot was Asa, and Kodshei Kalim, B'chol Machanei Yisrael. Could only eat Kodshei Kalim in the surrounding area within the Machanei Yisrael. Then they came into Eretz Yisrael, and there was a temporary stop in Gilgal. There was never supposed to be a permanent residence. So, Chutru Abamot, everyone was allowed to bring a mizbeach, build a mizbeach wherever they liked. And Kodshei Kalim, B'chol Makom. Then the Mishkan was set up in Shiloh, where it resided there for many, many years. Nesru Abamot. And Kodshei Kalim was only B'chol Haro'eh. In other words, anywhere which you could, if you were surrounding the Makom of Shiloh, and you could see the Mishkan in Shiloh, then you were allowed to eat Kodshei Kalim. But if you couldn't see the Makom of Mishkan, then you weren't allowed to eat Kodshei Kalim. I'll add an interesting historical note. They discovered on the mountain surrounding the Makom Mishkan in Shiloh that there was there was like a tiny little wall. If you stood on one side of the wall, you could actually see the Makom Mishkan. If you stood on the other side of the wall, that you couldn't see the Makom Mishkan. Can you read that wall was to demarcate this point. After Shiloh, the destruction of the Mishkan in Shiloh by the Plishtim, it moved to Nov and Givon, where it was there temporarily, therefore Chutru Bamot, and then once again, Kodshei Kalim was eaten everywhere. But finally, Ba'u Yerushalayim, Nesru Bamot, V'lo haya alehem od heter. Whereas once we got to Yerushalayim, it became a permanent fixture, and even after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Yerushalayim remained the Makom HaShechina, and therefore Bamot could not be built anywhere else, and similarly, Kodshei Kalim couldn't be eaten anywhere else. And the question is, why is Yerushalayim really any different to Shiloh or the Mishkan in the Midbar? At the end of the day, the Kedusha is the Kedusha of the Shechina. The reason why you can't build a Bama elsewhere is because it's not the Makom of the Shechina. The reason we can't eat Kodesh Kalim elsewhere is because it's not Makom of the Shechina. So why is Yerushalayim different? So here we have to be very sensitive to the fact that why was the Mishkan Yerushalayim? And here there seems to be a difference between the Mishkan Yerushalayim and the Mishkan everywhere else. Everywhere else, wherever the Mishkan went, that became the place of the Shechina. But the Shechina was always a function of the Mishkan. It was never actually a function of the geographic location of the Mishkan. So in Shiloh, while the Mishkan was in Shiloh, so the Shechina was there. Since the Shechina was there, Kodesh Kalim had to be eaten there. Bamot were asur. But the Shechina was never a function of Shiloh. It was a function of the Mishkan, and therefore when the Mishkan was destroyed, there's no longer today any significance to Shiloh. But by Yerushalayim, that's not the case. Yerushalayim was chosen because of the significance of the geographical location, the Kedusha, the specialness of Yerushalayim itself. The Rambam at the very beginning of his Beit HaBechira discusses HaMizbeach Mekoma Mechuvan Biyoter, the location of the Mishkan, of the Mizbeach. It's absolutely precise. It says Masar Biyad Kol, the very same place Shebana David Shlomo Mizbeach. That's the place where Avraham Avinu brought Yitzchak on the Akedah. That's the place where Noach built a Mizbeach when he came out of the Teva. That's the place where Kaye and Hevel made a Mizbeach. In other words, this is a very, very precise location where the actual location itself is significant. The pasuk in Re'eh says, where do you have to eat Ma'as Hasheni? You have to eat Ma'as Hasheni lifnei Hashem Elokecha. B'makom asher yivcha. Says the Sifrei, lifnei Hashem Elokecha, that means Shiloh. Because the Shechina was there, and therefore you had to eat Kodesh Kalim lifnei Hashem at that location. But makom asher yivcha refers to Yerushalayim. When once we got to Yerushalayim, the Shechina was no longer simply a function of the fact that that's where the Mishkan was. The Shechina was there was a marriage between the place itself and the Shechina, and therefore the Ashrat HaShechina in Yerushalayim became a permanent fixture and remains there forever. And if we get back to the original Mishnah in Kalim, that's why the fact that Shechina rests in Yerushalayim devolves and gives Kedusha to everywhere geographically linked to it. Yerushalayim is the epicenter, and Eretz Yisrael is the surrounding location, because since the Kedusha is a function of the place itself, therefore the Kedusha bubbles over to all the surrounding places as well.